Amazon is a very fluid company. They're constantly making changes, and one day they can just, cut you off, and then you're left with, a bunch of trucks, a bunch of employees that you're going to have to lay off.
If you file taxes as an S Corp, you can pay yourself as an employee and you can avoid that self-employment tax.
People will get on YouTube and they'll listen to a reseller and ask the reseller questions in the comments about how they should do their taxes, and that's not the way.
I still always recommend to people that they start figuring out how to run their business in a legit way, how to operate their finances in a legit way, and structure it so that they have basic protection for themselves, their personal assets.
If you want to be successful as an entrepreneur, first of all, you need to have.
Welcome to another episode of the Couch Pod. Today I'm joined by Z, also known as the Maniacal Merchant on YouTube. He's a full-time reseller, side hustler, content creator, a man of many hats. Z, thank you so much for joining me on this episode today. So we were just talking about your background a little bit. You're out in California and you don't work a full-time employment type of deal, but you have many different things that you do to bring in income and support yourself and your family. Could you start breaking that down for our audience?
So I would say my number one moneymaker right now is Amazon Flex. That's kind of how I got my business started. The Shipping Office LLC was started in 2018 as a third-party logistics firm, and I'm a one-man show. It's a single-member LLC structured as an S corporation, and it was kind of birthed by necessity, really. I quit my job in 2020 during the pandemic due to several different factors, mainly to stay at home with the kids. And I was taking college classes and I kind of just went full time into that. I just recently graduated from university. And since then, I've just been building this reselling business. Here I am.
Very cool. And a lot of little interesting niches as you were just speaking there. So for our audience who may not be familiar, what exactly is Amazon Flex?
Amazon Flex is basically independent contracting job with Amazon where you get available offers sent to you. You're able to accept those offers, whatever time frame, fits your schedule, and you basically just pick up packages from their substations and deliver them. Usually it's between a 3 and a 5 hour block of time, so it's not that much time, and I would say average pay is about 25 to sometimes I've even gone higher than $30 and adjusted for gas.
So after wear and tear on vehicle and gas, your take-home profit on hourly work with Amazon Flex might be like $25 an hour.
Correct. I would say average to 25. That's fair.
And do they have requirements? Like, how do you sign up for something like that?
Well, I signed up several years ago, actually, and then I was put on a wait list. And then once I got off of that wait list, they didn't have a substation in my area. This is when I was located in San Bernardino, California. And since moving to Corona, they had an opportunity in a Corona substation. So it's like 10 minutes down the street. And that's when, I kind of jumped into it. It's been about 2 years now since I've been doing it. I don't do it full time. I don't do it every day, but it definitely helps with the bills.
Absolutely. But is that something, if you did want to do every day, there's like enough work available in your area? Or is it kind of limited to what hours you can choose?
You definitely can do it full time. There's definitely enough opportunities in my particular area. I would rather not, to be honest, because I have 4 kids. So it wouldn't bring in enough income to support the household. But if you're a single, individual and you wanted to make a full-time living off of it and you have a more fuel efficient vehicle, I drive a truck. So it's a little bit, it's a little skewed, but you can definitely make a full-time living off of it if you had to.
Yeah. And for those of you that don't know, Amazon outsources a lot of their supply chain and logistics to third-party providers. Nowadays, there's been news that they are trying to internalize more of those functions, but in reality, they might not be as reliant on FedEx or UPS, but they still have third parties that are smaller that they outsource these functions to. Now, what I've heard about these third-party providers is that they could be very small, like single individuals, all the way up to like companies with like hundreds or thousands of vehicles. So could you unpack that a little bit more for our audience?
Yeah, so as far as I go, I'm just a single individual. Like I said, I have an LLC, which all my income gets funneled through that LLC. But I've also talked to other third-party logistic providers who are just like you described. They have thousands of employees. Amazon provides them the vehicles, which I don't know how that really works as far as how they're expensed, but pretty much just like you said, it can go from just a one person, sole proprietor with no company whatsoever to giant corporation that's employing other employees to drive their vehicles and deliver packages for Amazon.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Z, is I've only heard about the other side of the Amazon 3PL network, which is Amazon contracting with these larger companies. I had no idea that you, as like a single member LLC, could actually be a part of this network. So that's super interesting to hear. And some of the problems that I've heard about the Amazon Flex network is that they encourage you to build these businesses, right? Like go hire more employees, get more trucks, and there's going to be work. And then they start changing their policies or their pay rates or how they're doing the zoning and their expectations around delivery, and that essentially shifts all of the costs and the burden to the 3PL providers.
Absolutely. And I think that's one risk that one should keep in mind if they're going that route. Amazon is a very fluid company. They're constantly making changes, and one day they can just, cut you off, and then you're left with, a bunch of trucks, a bunch of employees that you're going to have to lay off. And I've definitely seen that happen through some larger companies that I've talked to that actually tried to hire me, and they basically get paid on the net, like the net difference. So Amazon will be paying them $25 an hour. They'll be paying their employees $18 an hour. So they're basically getting paid on that differential.
Right. And so it pays for them, it's a volume game as much as possible. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, there is with Amazon the opportunity, and just like in general with Amazon, you can build a business on the back of Amazon, but then you are very at the whim of Amazon itself. Any changes to their policy. I know people that have Amazon commerce businesses that sell things on Amazon FBA, etc. And they run into the same issues. Like I have a friend, his business, I think he does around like 7 million in sort of textile products on Amazon. He imports them wholesale from the Middle East into the United States and distributes them through FBA. And they do about $7 million in sales every year, but they're at around a 10% net operating margin, which is not very good. But, it's still like $1 million, almost $1 million in profit every year between him and his partner. So they're doing well. But recently they did something, they changed their policy with FBA, and that increased their cost for shipping something like 30%. And then poof, $200,000-$300,000 in their business just disappeared.
Hey, couch flippers. Before we get into the podcast today, I have a question for you. Do you want the most unfair advantage in your couch flipping market? That's where Ivy Flip enters the game. We give our users the fastest search times, so you're the one who gets first dibs on all the good deals, while everyone else can have your scraps. Not to mention our cross-listing tool also gives users a 10 to 20% increase in sales. With Ivy Flip, you're not just ahead, you're leading with the premium technology for couch flipping. Constant updates ensure you're always equipped with the speed and efficiency to win. Why settle for less when you can have the best? Don't just work hard, and be smart. Download Ivy Flip now and see the difference for yourself. Just search Ivy Flip on the iOS or Google Play Store, or click the link in the description and get a free trial now.
Absolutely. And that's why I try to stay as diversified as I can as far as my income streams go, because that's another stream that I was pursuing when I first started the Shipping Office LLC in 2018. That's when I actually sold my first item. It was a used book, several used books, but my first item was a used book in 2018 through Merchant Fulfilled. So I was shipping the items myself. Prior to getting started with the Amazon Flex, I was getting involved with the FBA. And I'm still involved with the FBA a little bit, so I can kind of relate to a little bit of what you're saying. But again, Amazon is constantly changing, constantly evolving, and that's something that people have to keep in mind when they're dealing with Amazon.
Yeah, so one thing that's really interesting, you started your single member LLC in 2018, but then you also earlier made this distinction about how a single member LLC, but it's structured as an S Corp. And I think people get this confused all the time, but these are actually two different categories of things, right? One is a legal entity and the other is a tax entity. So maybe you could break that down for our audience. It's kind of sophisticated, like finance that we never get to talk about on the pod.
Yeah, so it was originally structured just, as a regular single member LLC, and I filed taxes myself as a single member LLC. But as I started to incorporate more revenue streams through the company, that's when things got a little bit more complex for me. And I have a degree in accounting, so I'm not unfamiliar. This isn't foreign to me, but I didn't trust myself with knowing all the loopholes and all the caveats that one should know when they're filing their own company's taxes. So I've since employed a CPA that handles all of that. And it was through their guidance that I ended up structuring the company, filed taxes as a S Corp. It's not actually structured like as a business entity, as a corporation, but you have that ability to elect to file your taxes under the S Corp designation. And that unlocks a whole lot of tax benefits. For one, you're only taxed on the Social Security and Medicare and stuff like that. The income that you basically pay yourself, the company pays you. And if you don't structure it that way, you can get what's called double taxed. And that's something that the S Corp provides protection against.
Absolutely. In other words, if you file taxes as an S Corp, you can pay yourself as an employee and you can avoid that self-employment tax, is my understanding of it, which, I'm not a tax guy either, but there are levels to tax strategies, right? And so for most flippers starting out, like a lot of flippers starting out don't even pay taxes. Like, let's just be honest about that, right?
Right. That's an important thing. Yeah, I was just going to say that's important because people will get on YouTube and I've done this, so I'm not, throwing shade, but people will get on YouTube and they'll listen to a reseller and ask the reseller questions in the comments about how they should do their taxes. And that's not the way people should go about it. If you're unclear, you need to get a CPA. It's going to be worth it. It's going to pay for itself, be able to unlock so many different tax benefits, but also they're going to keep you from getting audited or filing a fraudulent, maybe they don't know, but they might be filing a fraudulent tax return if they're not, following all the tax rules.
Absolutely. And there's two sides to the story. The first if you are flipping online and there's a definite paper trail, then it's very easy for you to get audited and end up owing penalty plus interest and fees if you were to, lose that audit. So there's a danger there. But let's say you're dealing cash only on marketplace or local marketplaces, etc. There's less of an audit trail there. So maybe the risk is lower if you were to get audited, like what the IRS could prove you had earned an income, but they have other ways of assessing that. But, let's say the risk is lower if you were to deal like cash locally than if you were to be selling things on eBay, et cetera, right? I still always recommend to people that they start figuring out how to run their business in a legit way, how to operate their finances in a legit way, and structure it so that they have basic protection for themselves, their personal assets, and to, do right by the IRS. And it's not because I'm some, IRS loving tax junkie. It's, I'm far from that. But I think, if you're a flipper at your heart, you're an entrepreneur. You're trying to buy low, sell high, which is one of the fundamental aspects of entrepreneurship. Creating value, figure out what people want, what they're going to pay for, and sell it to them, right? But in your case, maybe you're not creating a product, you're finding something that's already been created and helping reclaim the value in it, making it available to the next person. But there are levels to this. So the first level is you're like operating as a flipper. There's no paper trail. It's all cash, and your finances, there's no distinction between your personal and your business finances. And then the next level up would be to incorporate, create separate entity for yourself. Well, I guess you could, from the first level would be operate as if there's zero distinction between your personal and business finances. Everything is happening, maybe cash or transactions are happening out of your personal checking account, etc. The level above that is to, declare 1099 income. So you have your W-2 income, you have your 1099 income, you're operating as a freelancer or contractor, and you are declaring that and paying taxes as that, but it's still happening out of your personal checking account. The level above that is to incorporate, probably as a single member LLC. And this gives you the protection of separating your business finances from your personal finances, which is important in case, like if you're flipping couches, for example, you're in and out of people's homes, you're driving a vehicle for commercial purposes, and these are big bulky items. There's actually a lot of risk there, right? And let's say something does happen and someone wants to come after you and your family, your home, your assets. There's zero protection if you haven't incorporated, right? And the whole idea of a corporation is that idea of LLC, limited liability corporation, right? If you operate with the correct financial procedures, you have that separation of personal and corporate assets, which is one of the main benefits of having a corporation. And you can, now you're more legit. You have a business EIN. You can apply for a commercial insurance policy. There are some other benefits like that. And then let's say there's more levels, of course, beyond this, but the strategy even above that, which is the strategy that you're using, is to have a holding company which holds all of your other companies. And then, there's a different taxation and payment strategy.
What I would say about that, because you're totally correct and you're obviously limiting your liability. That's where the LLC comes from. But I am taking somewhat of a risk. I want to be totally clear about that by not separating my businesses. So if I'm running multiple businesses from one LLC, even if I'm using a DBA or doing business as, if the Maniacal Merchant YouTube channel gets sued, then they could come for the assets of the Fleeky Flea Market, which is my eBay store. So there is risk in that. And like you said, there are levels, but I think that everyone should have, if they're doing freelance work, if they're doing contracted work, if they're doing any work that doesn't come with a W-2, it's my belief that you should have some type of business structure. And definitely, even if you're a sole proprietor, you should definitely be separating your business from your personal finances, because not only is it less sketchy when you're filing your taxes, but you can also claim business expenses against your income. And that's why I think a lot of people misinterpret and they get wrong. They think, okay, well, I don't want to claim any of my income on my taxes because I don't want to get taxed on that. But if you have the business expenses to claim against those, then unless you're making millions or even like thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, especially in the beginning stages, the IRS, they know for the first 3 years, you're probably not going to have a profit. What are they going to tax? You get taxed on the profit, right? So if you don't have any profit, if you have enough, business expenses to cover those, you can, like the first year, I'm not a tax expert and it's been a while since I filed my own taxes, but I know the first year when I started, you could claim up to $3,000 just in startup costs. If you didn't make $3,000 in revenue, then there's nothing to tax.
Absolutely. That's a really important point as well, that, you can lower your tax obligation by declaring expenses, which is why I always recommend to our customers use the sales tracking feature in the app. It's very simple. Every time you purchase an item, you log that transaction. Every time you make a sale, you log that transaction. You declare all of your expenses, gas, cleaning supplies, tolls, whatever. And then at the end of the year, you have a nice little spreadsheet. Give that to your CPA, give that to your tax preparer, and it's going to bring down your tax obligation by a significant amount. The final point that I want to make about formally separating your finances and doing business in the right way is, for most people, once again, if you're a flipper, you're an entrepreneur. Just because you're flipping couches or stuff on eBay, or you're contracting to Amazon or whatever your side hustle or your entrepreneurial thing may be, doesn't mean that's the thing that you're going to be doing in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now. I think a lot of us have ambitions greater than that, and some of us, maybe we're happy couch flipping as a side hustle, or, we want to take our flipping hustle, make it more legit, turn it into like a brick and mortar business or a franchise, or, we have a dream of creating an empire around the thing that we're doing. Great. I'm not knocking that at all. Or, you may want to take your side hustle and build up liquidity and then start flipping houses, which is also a very common path. But regardless, the idea is the same. We have this desire to progress in our finances, in our entrepreneurial journey, really only is possible if you have a track record. Because the way that you make money in America in 2024 is not through trading time for dollars, but through leverage, right? So if I can get access to other people's money, if I can get access to capital, then, and I have an idea, I have a business model, I have an investment thesis, then I can greatly multiply my own finances, the time that I have available in a day, through access to other people's money. That's only going to happen if you have a proven track record, whether or not that's, your business P&L that you're showing to an investor for your next business venture, or to put money into your current business, or you're going to the bank for a mortgage. It's all the same. They want proof of income. They want to see that you have been like money is coming in, that you have cash flow, and that this is reliable documentation of that.
Absolutely. And that goes back to what you had mentioned earlier about, after you have structured yourself as an actual business entity, you get an EIN number, or you can apply for an EIN number. You should apply for an EIN number. That's basically a social security number for your business. You could then take that, and I've done this, you could take that and you can look for credit, and you can get business credit that's separate from your personal credit. Your personal credit doesn't even take a hit. But if you don't have that track record, if you don't have that business bank account, then it's going to be very, very pretty much impossible to get any type of business credit solely in your business's name. And that's how America was built, right? Is off of debt and leverage. And I think if you want to scale, then, debt is really the only way.
Absolutely. And this is a topic that gets brought up on the podcast quite frequently. It's the idea of the American dream. This is a topic that's very near and dear to me, in that I'm a big, big believer of the American dream. Like, for all that's happening in our country, I still believe in the opportunity that is available in the United States of America. And I think that comes from my immigrant background. Like, I was born a United States citizen, but I was born in Korea. And my dad, his entire side of the family, they're refugees from Cambodia. And they came here in 1982 after surviving a genocide. And I remember my entire life growing up, he told me, don't complain, right? And for me, there were so many things to complain about. Like, like the other kids have Lunchables, and, I got like this weird smelling lunch in the school cafeteria. And, I wish I had the same nice clothing that the other kids had. So for me, like growing up in a bubble, I had a lot of complaints, but it wasn't until I got older and I really saw from more of a global perspective what it's like to be an American versus what it's like to be a Cambodian, or what it's like to be someone from a different country, that I got more of an appreciation for what he was talking about. And, once I had that realization, it was very difficult for me to go back. And so now I still believe in the American dream, like the prosperity and opportunity that is available for you in this country if you're willing to work hard and you connect yourself to the right people and you're striving for that opportunity. It's still there, but it's not as easy as it once was, because back in the day, my dad coming in 1980, if you bought a property 4 decades ago and you just waited, that was going to explode in value over the next couple decades, right? 5x, 10x in value, which is in large part a lot of the wealth creation that happened for the baby boomers. Is they just, worked a normal job, they bought some property, that property exploded in value, and things were a lot easier back then. The economy was a lot healthier back then. And we don't have that same, it's a lot harder than it was back then, but it doesn't mean that you can't do well for yourself and your family. You just have to get creative, and you almost by necessity have to be an entrepreneur. You got to do stuff outside of the context of W-2 if you want to get ahead, unless you're one of these tech degree, like high-level tech degrees or high-level professionals like lawyer, doctor. And even then, like being a lawyer or doctor, I know lawyers and doctors that are in 6 figures debt that are still digging out at 40 years old. So it's not, for granted that they're going to be rich and successful either.
Absolutely. And you actually said a few things that I can definitely resonate with. One, my grandmother's Thai, so I definitely can relate to having the Asian, lineage. But one thing that I would push back on is what you said about it being harder now than it was before. And I would kind of argue that it's easier now than it was before. When my grandparents were growing up, it was go to school, get a job, work for the rest of your life, and hopefully you can retire with enough income to support yourself for your final years. Now we have everything we need to build a business in our pockets. And I think that's something that they didn't have. And, I was talking to my grandpa about Amazon Flex, and he said, man, when I was making, $100, $200 a month working for the Air Force in the 70s, if I had that access to just make a little bit of extra income by delivering packages a couple hours out of my day, man, we would have lived a lot better life. So it's give and take. There are things that obviously are more difficult, but I believe this is a consumer society. We're a consumer nation. And over the last 100 years, we consume and then we buy new stuff. We throw it out and buy new stuff. And I think that's where a lot of your business can relate is, the couch flipping. You find couches on the side of the curb. I see them all the time. I've actually thought about starting a couch flipping business. I talked to one of my buddies about it and he wasn't really on board. And that's not something I wanted to kind of jump into by myself while I had, all these other aspirations as far as clothing and books go, because that's my main revenue stream right now is used books, used clothes. And that's one thing I love about Amazon Flex, because it's not just the $24, $25 an hour I'm making for 2 or 3 hours. I find a lot of stuff. You would be surprised. You might not be surprised, but a lot of people out there watching this would probably be surprised at the type of stuff we throw away, especially in California. I can't really speak to any other states. I don't know. Maybe it's worse, maybe it's better. But in California, in my area, people are throwing out so much of value. And not only is there a sustainability aspect of it, I honestly feel like this is like a noble endeavor, because otherwise it would end up into the landfills. We can go down that rabbit hole if you want. But at the end of the day, we're creating value from what other people are perceiving as junk or garbage. And we're getting it off of the streets. We're, creating an income stream for us so we can support our family, so we can keep the cycle going. That's what I love about America is I have yet to hear of another country with as much opportunity as we have. Yeah, we have complaints. I can't complain because nobody listens anyway. But, all I see is opportunity. I'm an opportunist. I'm a capitalist, and I'm always looking for the next come up.
It's weird. Like when I was in college, read a lot of Marx, and it's a little bit different, right? It's like the moral body. It's a body of thought, intellectual body of thought that led to the principles of socialism, but it's actually a little bit different. And I'm not a Marxist scholar, but what I got out of it was that Marxism really is a theory of ontology. It's a theory of being. And the idea is that labor is an inalienable part of what it means to be a human being. So, if you're a beaver, you build dams. If you're a bird, you build nests. But human beings are unique in that we have this capacity to create in a way that is beyond utilitarian. It's, we can create for aesthetic reasons as well. We can create for pleasure. And that is a beautiful and essential part of what it means to be human. And the issue that he had with capitalism is the fact that it alienates people from their labor and turns it into a commodity. And that's not the essence of labor. Labor is invaluable. It's immeasurable. It can't be commoditized. And that is the ethical issue with capitalism. But in my later years, pretty soon after actually, I became a full-fledged capitalist. And I think part of that was seeing the tension between capitalism and socialism that had happened in the mid 1950s to 2000s, and the destruction that it ensued between these polarities. And is that all socialism's fault? Is that all capitalism's fault? I think it is a little bit of both. I think it's, you can point to any socialist country and say oh, they're socialist and they failed, and therefore socialism in and of itself is not a good political system. But there's a lot of factors contributing to that, right? And I'm not going to get into the full history lesson here, but I'm going to skip this because it's too much of a rabbit hole.
we could be here all day. Yeah, it's barbed wire topics, that's for sure. But I agree, capitalism is something that I think can corrupt. At the same time, it could provide, generational wealth and value. That's one thing that I don't want to just hoard money and hold on to it for my own, self-interest. I intend to eventually build an empire just like you, and eventually just give it all away. That's what it's all about for me.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a lot about, I want to take advantage of the opportunity that my family created for me in coming to the United States and working hard and sacrificing to give me an education in the future. And I also want to create opportunities for other people that don't have them, because I was fortunate enough to have one. And I think that's, for me, is only possible through the lens of entrepreneurship. And people when I was younger, I thought everyone should be an entrepreneur. I was just because of the Marxism, I was well, in a way, if we are all capitalists and we're all entrepreneurs, then we're the ones that are assigning the value to our labor, and therefore maybe it's not a commodification. It's just part of this equal exchange if everyone's an entrepreneur. But then I realized no, not everyone should be an entrepreneur. Some people should have jobs. That's the other thing I've realized.
We need employees. You're absolutely right. We need employees.
The world needs employees, and some people are just better suited to working for someone than being an entrepreneur. It takes a certain level of risk tolerance, drive, like ability to swim against the current and think differently to be a successful entrepreneur. And, I think some people are better suited and happier as employees, and there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, we need to create it. There are jobs available for people who aren't entrepreneurial where they can have fulfillment and be happy and feel like they're contributing to something and and make enough money to provide for themselves and their families. And there's absolutely zero things wrong with that.
And absolutely not. And I feel like I've never really put too much thought into this, but I love this, where this conversation is going, because I feel like the intersection where they both meet is a family business. If you have a family business, like what I hope to build, I don't know which one of my kids is going to want to, take my role and be the head of it. I'm sure I can probably guess, but like I said, I have 4 kids. A couple of them I can tell they're probably more suited at being employees. That's not saying anything negative about them. It's just the way they operate. But I can tell that a couple of my other kids, they want to be the decision maker. They want to be the captain of the ship, directing, which route we're taking. And I think that it's a beautiful thing creating a family business, because yes, you can have the top captain capitalists, guiding the entrepreneurial journey, but you can also have the employees in the family and they're all creating value for the same cause. And it's not like, you can't get, well, I'm pretty sure you can. There's a lot of dynamics, but it's like back to what you said, the employee at the end of the day, most of the time, employees just don't work for companies for the monetary value. They want belongingness. It's like Maslow's 5, levels of hierarchy. It's like they want to feel like they're in a place where they belong and that they're contributing to something valuable. And I think with a family business, that feeling is kind of intrinsic in the sense that you're making the family greater. You're spending more time together. You're building wealth that you can then pass on to the future generations. And that's what I love is the idea of a family business.
Now that you mention it, I haven't really thought about this before, but I really do like the idea of a family business as well. Unfortunately, my family is very small. I'm an only child, but my dad was an entrepreneur too. I mean, he wasn't very educated, unfortunately, because he escaped the genocide and, he basically only had a middle school education when he came to the United States. But he started hustling right away. Like, he worked in a textile factory in the US for a bit, making like minimum wage when minimum wage was $1.50 an hour. And he told me this one story where he saw a guy driving like a Corvette or whatever, and then he looked up the price. It was like $20,000. And he's just doing the math. He's like, how the fuck am I ever going to own a Corvette? And funny thing is, like, one day he did own a Corvette one day, but it wasn't working minimum wage. At one point he had like 3 stores in Chinatown selling counterfeit merchandise. So he like worked his way up from like having a wall in one of these stores to owning the store, to owning 3 stores and a warehouse. But that sort of counterfeit merchandise empire did come crumbling down at one point, say due to changes in how people were perceiving counterfeits, government action against them, and maybe some financial mismanagement on his part. But for a very long time, he also had a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan selling like lunch, like nothing special, fried chicken, that kind of stuff, sandwiches, like Vietnamese sandwiches. And I remember going to work there during the summers and I fucking hated it. Like, it was hot, it was poorly ventilated. We had to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go shopping, get the supplies, prep for lunch, and then, go through the lunch rush and then start winding down, cleaning up around like 6, 7, get out of there. So it was a hard day, hard day of work for me, at least. It was, I was like 14, 15 years old. And like, I didn't work very hard. I didn't take pride in what we were doing. I really hated it. I felt like it was sort of beneath me. And if I had a different perspective on that, maybe that business could still be here today. Like, if I had taken more pride and ownership in what we were doing and helped my dad out and, had been someone who wanted to take that over, maybe there would have been more longevity to that business. But, at the time, I just didn't see it for what it was. But maybe if I have kids, they'll take pride in what, I've created and be able to take that over. But the idea of like building something that has longevity and legs, like an empire that you can hand down to the next generation, is a very powerful thought.
Think about it every day.
That's cool. So that's what keeps you motivated.
Absolutely. And I kind of come from humble beginnings myself. It's funny that you mentioned, it was your uncle, you said, or your father?
That was my dad.
Oh, your dad. So, yeah, my grandmother, she kind of came from Thailand. My grandfather was in the Air Force, and she doesn't know how to read. She doesn't even know how to read Thai. She's just completely uneducated. She was raised on basically a farm in the jungle of Thailand. And it's funny because I think that's where I get a lot of my entrepreneurial spirit is from her. Some of it probably from my dad as well, who was always in and out of prison when I was growing up. So he wasn't really around, but that's another story. But she still to this day, she sells vegetables out of her garden, and probably makes as much as I do on eBay, like just selling vegetables out of her garden that she grows herself to her friends and church members. So definitely can relate to, wanting to do better, wanting more, not really understanding at the beginning, the value of a family business. I hope my kids do, but it's something that I hope I don't put too much pressure on them with, even though in the long run, I think they're going to have more of a mindset like you kind of grow into it and you're like, man, maybe if I would have put more effort into it, maybe, things, maybe I could have been a part of that legacy that, dad always was talking about creating. And I don't want to force anything upon them. If they want to, work at McDonald's, the only thing I say to them is be the best hamburger flipper that you can be. Like whatever you're going to do it to the fullest extent.
Take pride in what you do, no matter what it is. Yeah, it's funny that there's this difference between being educated and being entrepreneurial or knowing how to create value. And they're not equivalent, right? Because you could be the most educated person. I've seen this. Graduate with your master's degree and then you go work for someone making minimum wage. I've literally seen that, right?
Yeah, or you're a teacher.
Yeah, I've literally seen that. And these are highly educated people, but they're still living in financial distress. And in contrast, I've seen people who are very uneducated, nothing against them for that, but they're just not that educated. And they're very successful financially. They've been able to create wealth for themselves. And it's because they understand this principle of creating value for others and being able to commoditize that and being able to make money off of that.
Absolutely. I think it's important to kind of have both. To be honest, yes. Are there people that have, just the, financial prowess to not open a book, but they're able to, identify needs and wants from society and kind of exploit those and, become successful from it? Yes, absolutely. But I believe for the vast majority, you got to have both. If you want to be successful as an entrepreneur, first of all, you need to have the spirit. If you don't have the spirit, if you don't have the drive, if you don't have the motivation to, run things yourself, manage things yourself, then, the conversation ends there. But if you do, I think we're at a time where all the knowledge you need is accessible. I'm 32 years, about to be 33 years old this month, and I just graduated with my bachelor's degree from university. That doesn't mean anything. That means nothing. I'll rip up my degree because I don't expect to put it on my resume and give it to anyone. I did it for the knowledge and also the financial aid, scholarships, and grants that paid me thousands of dollars to get the degree. That was obviously an advantage as well. But the knowledge is out there. The internet is, vast ocean of knowledge that anybody, if they really want to, they can learn. They could learn everything. But what you're talking about is finding the value, finding the pain points of people and creating value for them. You don't need anything but the drive to do it, because there's pain points everywhere. There's wants and needs and desires everywhere. And if you can fill that gap, then you can make a lot of value for others and you could have a lot of success for yourself.
It's interesting. So I'm 32 as well, moving on to 33. So we're about the same age. And you just finished your bachelor's degree. And I also didn't put very much stock in a college degree either at a certain point, right? What was that process like? When did you decide to go back to school? Or had you started school, stopped, and then continued again down the line? Or what was that story?
So we kind of got to go back farther than that. I faced a lot of adversity in my life. San Bernardino, growing up in San Bernardino, the city went bankrupt in 2012, being surrounded by just poverty, and it's gotten worse, to be honest. Pretty much any street you drive down in San Bernardino, you're going to see homeless people and encampments and tents and just people out there struggling. So I fell into, the same trap that a lot of people from my area fall into and got into drugs, got into gangs, got into just not good things. and I ended up, following my dad's footsteps and going in and out of jail. And finally, eventually, I went to prison when I was 21, got out in 2014. And I had my first kid when I was in prison. So my wife, she got pregnant while I was in, or not while I was in prison, but just before I went to prison, had the baby while I was in prison. And that was the pivot point. That was the pivot point that told me, and I had a lot of time to think about it, that I need to change and I need to break the cycle, because what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to have my son being raised like I was raised, with a single mother, still living with my grandparents because my mother was working 2 jobs. And that was what clicked in me. And that's the only thing that clicked in me. Like, my kid saved my life, because there's only 2 other routes I would have went. And it was a stipulation of my parole after my release that I had to get a job. So the parole office helped me structure a resume, fill out applications. They called me one day. I got a job as a warehouse worker for a third-party logistics firm that was servicing General Mills. And I was the sanitation guy. Every day at 3-4 o'clock in the morning, I'd have to go to work and pick bugs out of flour or bugs out of cans of soup, and like just remove like the rotten and open nasty stuff that they can't sell. And then eventually, and I had never seen a forklift up until that point. Eventually I learned how to drive a forklift. I had like a mentor that I was working under, and he basically showed me how to drive a forklift off hours. And then I got to the point where I can drive a forklift. They hired me as a forklift driver. I became one of the top and I don't like to toot my own horn very often, but I was the top performer as far as productivity on that forklift for that company. And I applied for a lead position after a couple years. This is like 2016, almost 2017. And they denied me for the lead position because I didn't have like any experience other than, at that company. And it pissed me off. It pissed me off so bad. 3 weeks later, they had 3 supervisors quit. And, a supervisor is above the lead. And I said, you know what? I'm going to apply for supervisor. Like, that's how pissed I was. I'm like, they're going to have to give me another interview. And they couldn't find anybody else. So they said, look, if you enroll in college courses, we'll hire you as a supervisor. And that's what I did. I enrolled I immediately enrolled in business courses. That was a stipulation. They had to be business courses. And they hired me as supervisor. It was at San Bernardino Valley Community College. Took a few business courses. I was a supervisor for 3 years. The pandemic struck. I decided I'm going to go into school full time. I learned from watching YouTube, how I can apply for grants and scholarships and financial aid and all that. So that's what I did. I was self-employed actually, because by that time I had started the LLC and I was doing delivery routes there was other things that like I got into drop shipping as well, but that was more of here's my full-time job. This is side income. These are side gigs that I was funneling through the LLC. But when 2020 hit, my kids, they had to stay at home, had to get, distance learning and virtual learning and all that. So I decided to, cut ties with the company, go full-time into school, full-time into business, and got 2 associate's degrees in business and 1 associate's degree in accounting, like 8 different certificates from retail management, entrepreneurship, bookkeeping. I could go on and on, but I ended up applying for Cal State University, Channel Islands, because they were solely online. It was a solely online program that they were running for a bachelor's of science in business. And at this point, I'm going full throttle into anything I could find that would make me money. So I started options trading. I started drop shipping. I started going harder with the deliveries. Then I found eBay, and I was still doing Amazon merchant fulfilled, but then I pivoted to Amazon FBA. And since I've slowed down on Amazon FBA because I've pivoted more towards eBay. I found it to be more lucrative. And yeah, I just graduated from Cal State last month.
It's an amazing story. I really appreciate you sharing that with me and our audience. I think we all don't, like, not all of us get get to take the traditional path in life, but the adversity that we face along the way can make us a lot stronger for it. And in fact, I have a lot more respect for people that have been through challenges such as yourself than someone that, like went to a good school, came from a good family, they graduated through college, they kind of got that like traditional, nothing against them. It's just, for someone to go through what you had gone through and find your way, even if it's 10 years later than normal, right? To graduate with the degree tells me a lot more about your character than, someone who had everything handed to them. And it's not anything against someone that came from fortunate circumstances in a lot of ways. Like I came from fortunate circumstances too, but it is very like there are gears that are turning, like despite everything that you've been through, there's this volition and this drive to be successful. And eventually you found your way. And I think was always going to be the case with certain people, right? Like no matter where you put someone, if they're in very humble beginnings, like some people, they just have that drive to be successful and they eventually find their way if they're able to overcome their environment, which is tough, right? Like statistically, if you're born in the ghetto and you live in the ghetto, you're going to stay in the ghetto, right? But some people, they find their way despite all of that and overcome their circumstances, overcome their environment. And if you're going to transcend your environment, you have to believe that this is the case, right? That the ones with the drive will succeed. Because if you think that you're just a victim to your circumstances, then you will be. So, it's less a comment about what the reality of it is, right? The reality is like environment is really important. But for the ones that transcend environment, it's all about mindset. Like your mindset has to be better than your environment.
Bingo, that part right there. And that kind of led me into making the channel. Like honest to God, the only reason I made the channel was to somehow contact and communicate with people like me that have gone through that same circumstance or a similar circumstance that just don't know where to start, just are looking for a way out. And I've had so many friends that are probably still back and forth to prison. I have so many friends that have died. I've witnessed my friends be murdered. Like I'm trying to help people, and I realize that if I turn on a camera and just start talking about you should do this, you should do that, it's not going to touch anybody as much as it would had I gained some credibility. And that's where I'm at right now. I'm trying to show people that, what I'm doing is sustainable. What I'm doing is feasible for anybody that's like me. There's nothing special about me or what I've done, and that's why I created the channel is to kind of talk to young me and show him that, there's another way and you don't have to be a victim. I don't like that. I don't like anybody to victimize themselves due to their circumstances, because there's been people throughout history, well recorded, that, people with nothing, people, immigrants from different countries that come over here on boats with absolutely nothing with barely the clothes on their back. That's all they have. And they've been able to build successful companies and employ thousands of other people. So if there's no reason for them not to be successful, then there's no reason for anybody else to be successful. And that's where I'm at now. So hopefully I can build more credibility, get more kind of notoriety, and then kind of just preach my word. That's actually the first time I've publicly, laid out my little storyline, because I don't want people to think like I'm creating this channel for like, woe is me and these are all my issues and this is what I've had to deal with, because this is true. This is what I've had to deal with, but I want people to see the successful part and then look at the backstory.
Absolutely. And I think people need role models. It's very, very important for someone that is going through a tough time to hear stories from other people that have been through what they're going through and see what they're able to make of themselves. And I didn't understand the importance of that for a long time. I thought it was like almost like weak, right? Like why? Like I'll give you an example. I didn't realize this, but growing up, my favorite movies were always martial arts movies. And I had no idea why, right? Like I always liked watching Jet Li and Jackie Chan. I love Jackie Chan movies. I love like martial arts, etc. And it wasn't until I started like hearing these stories about representation in film, like when I was older, that I started to reflect back on it. And, I'm not this like big liberal PC guy, like every movie should have like a super diverse, like to me, it didn't really matter, right? But as I started thinking about my own experience, it actually clicked. And I was like, well, maybe there's a reason why I gravitated towards all these like Jet Li and Jackie Chan movies. And it's because like there weren't familiar faces for me as an Asian kid growing up in Pennsylvania, people that I could relate to. And I think if you're going through a tough time, it really does help to hear from people that have been through what you've been through. So I appreciate you coming on the pod today, sharing your story. This wasn't exactly what I thought we'd be talking about. Typically, we talk more about like, flipping, get into the nitty gritty. So maybe that's an opportunity for us to dig in a future episode of the podcast. But Z, I appreciate you so much for coming on today and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. I'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks.